Hello, and welcome to the ELA World Languages PLC presentation, starring Alex Ledford, Ann Curley, Michelle Carter, Lynn Blair, and Abigail Kennedy.
Our group is diverse. We cover several subject areas and different curricula within subjects. As we discussed student issues at the beginning of the school year, we found feedback was a commonality. We just approached the issue from different angles, so we decided we could learn from each other and share strategies used in live lessons and daily practices and gain new perspectives. What follows is our journey.
As a team, in my PLC, we examined strategies each member used in their live lessons. We shared our ideas and offered suggestions to the group. For my deliberate practice, I chose number 20, helping students revise new knowledge. I noticed that my French 2 students were struggling in modules 4 and 5, as well as modules 6 and 7. 4 and 5 is at the end of the module and deals with the two past tenses in French, the passé composé and the imparfait. Modules 6 and 7 are the direct and indirect objects and object pronouns. I noticed that students were not scoring well on the quizzes nor on the DBAs. So I examined different strategies that I could try with my students. One of the things, I tutored face-to-face at Mitchell High School, where I have a large number of students. These students did not choose to take French online, and I find that they responded well to face-to-face. They preferred having me explain it to them as they followed along in the lesson. We worked in small groups. They were able to ask questions and provide me with examples. I had them practice in small groups of 3 and 4. As a result, I also gave feedback and changed the questions that I asked on the DBA to get them to explain what they understood and to compare the two tenses. I also offered tutoring for these students in my live classroom. We did have some technical issues getting bumped off, and some of the students didn't sign in at the set appointment time, so that caused some delay. I did find, however, as a result of the tutoring and the face-to-face, that these students' scores improved on their quizzes, and students did better on the DBAs as a result of the tutoring. I did find, however, as a result of the tutoring and the face-to-face, that these students' scores improved on their quizzes, and students did better on the DBAs as a result of the tutoring. So now what? I will continue to develop and offer standard-based live lessons for each of the difficult modules. I will explore scales for students to examine their learning. I would also like for students to pay attention to rubrics to better understand their learning. A simple strategy I plan to implement is to provide login for live lessons, the login information rather for live lessons in the welcome call email, and to spend time during the week welcome call explaining to students and parents. I would like to also incorporate 1 day a week for tutoring office hours.
Since I knew that the AP courses that I teach this year were being redesigned, it was a natural choice to choose DP number 6, Identifying Critical Content. This year, both of my AP History courses, AP World and AP Euro, have new essay types, which brought along new rubrics, realigned content standards throughout the course, and an increased emphasis on historical thinking skills. I figured that I would be spending my year pointing out the new information that had been added to the course and explaining the ways to write the new essays and to employ the new historical thinking skills, so I figured, why not make this my DP and focus on doing it very well? My first step was to figure out what exactly was this critical content I needed to identify. I looked over the materials from the College Board and figured out there were 5 things that I needed to focus on: new essays, historical thinking skills, the multiple choice, the standards, and what students felt that they didn't already know. I found our bi-weekly PLC meetings to be very informative. This allowed me an opportunity to, despite my differing content, to work with my peers to figure out what strategies that they were using in their live lessons and content that really worked for them, and figure out what I could use for myself. As I began to plan and employ my live lessons, I wanted to make sure that I was focusing on the skills and information that my students needed the most. So I employed the key concepts and learning objectives that were provided by the College Board for both courses, as well as the rubrics for the skills and essays in my planning. Since my AP students are go-getters and overachievers, I was able to get them to attend a number of live lessons that focused on the skills at length, and that went longer than the lessons that I would normally use with students in the wider chat rooms. For the new essays, after a brief session of direct instruction, I was able to really delve into the rubrics of these essays with my students. We used sample prompts and had the students work together to come up with some new prompts, and were really able to pick them apart. The live lesson that drew the biggest crowd, and in fact drew some students from middle school for some reason, was the one for the document-based question. I was lucky enough to have some students who had already completed the first semester of the course and had taken the test in their original classrooms come in to help the new students understand what they should be doing on the exam. To ensure that I was following up with these students, I had each of them rewrite one of the DBQs that they had scored lowly upon. This time they had to identify the critical content from the rubric and all of the skill points that they would have earned had they done it correctly, by highlighting or writing in a different color. I also felt that it was very important for me to work on identifying the critical content in the modules as I redesigned them as well. I focused on adding a key concept and geographic overview to the beginning of each module, realigning my DBAs, rewriting the tests, and including the new essay formats. The overview that began each of the time period modules in the course pointed out geographically all of the different kingdoms that were taking place at this time, and included all of the key concepts and learning objectives provided by the College Board. That way the student knew exactly what they should be learning as they headed into each module. Since all of the new multiple choice questions on the exam would be stimulus-based, I had to redesign every single multiple choice quiz and test throughout the course. Since multiple choice was already a large portion of the course, this was a significant number of questions and distractors. As soon as I was able to wrap my head around the demands of each of the new essay formats in the courses, I went about writing a new essay for each of the time periods in both of the courses. This resulted in over 30 new essays that were aligned with the new critical content for the course. While not necessarily a new idea in the AP history field, I began to include this year a method for my students to focus on the social, political, religious, intellectual, technological, cultural, and economic elements of each of these new content areas. Once I had added all of this new content into the course itself, and then begun to teach this content through the live lessons, I realized that I needed a way to start tracking whether or not my students were picking up what I was putting down, if they could smell what I was stepping in, if they could smell what the rock was cooking. To wit, I redesigned all of my DBA questions to better reflect the key concepts and learning objectives of the College Board. I also needed to make sure that my students were paying attention to the new DBQ and LEQs, so I began to question them about those as well as the historical thinking skills at the end of every content module. By the end of third quarter, my students seemed to firmly grasp the things that I had been teaching them, and were able to identify the critical content pretty close to on their own. So I asked them to start identifying for me what they felt that they didn't really know, what they felt that they needed to know, and what they hadn't really mastered yet. While this did result in a few phone calls about the different essays and short answer questions, this mostly resulted in live lessons focusing on specific content areas or the span of history of a particular country such as China or India. All in all, I was able to focus on my DP by adding in new module content, new module assignments, new live lessons featuring new skills and content, revamped DBA questions, and rewrites for the essay questions that my students really need to pass this week. Since I am the only one who teaches AP World or AP Euro, I will be relying upon my PLC group to continue to offer me fantastic ideas for new pedagogy skills while focusing myself on the content of my particular courses.
My deliberate practice focused on helping students revise knowledge. The desired effect was that students can examine, explain, and revise previous content to deepen understanding. So that was the purpose between my live lessons and also with my feedback, DVAs, and other communication with students. So students did not appear to be looking at the feedback when resubmitting assignments, so I wanted to develop a live lesson or a way that would specifically teach students to review and revise their work. I really enjoyed our group meetings. During that time, we gave each other feedback on our live lessons and strategies on how to improve. I really enjoyed learning what other people were doing in their live lessons to benefit their students and ways in which I could change things in my own to do the same for my own students. I also enjoyed giving out information as well, so that it was a great give and take within these meetings. I really enjoyed the environment and the fact that we could learn from each other. My main objective in creating the live lessons was to focus on certain assignments that students had difficulty mastering that also made a difference on their success with future assignments. Some of the modules lessons go hand in hand with each other, so unless they actually can go back and review and understand the content, they have difficulty mastering the content further on in the module. So I wanted to be able to lay that foundation so that they were able to successfully complete the entire module. I used different strategies. For instance, in the claim and counterclaim live lesson, students had to use a Padlet throughout the lesson. Although students could see each other's answers, they were not able to use the same reasonings, which kept their answers unique. I also used learning scales to measure student growth. They had to rate themselves at the beginning. We reviewed and reflected throughout the lesson, and then they rated themselves again at the end. I also used other types of feedback, like written feedback, to indicate how students grew from one submission to the next. Because of the openness our PLC group had with one another, we were able to strategize for live lessons, but also help each other with other means of communication with students, whether that be through feedback or phone calls or text messages, and really help students understand the importance of laying a foundation for understanding the material as they move along so that they're able to subsequently do well throughout the module and not just through one lesson. As a result of the work we did in our PLC, I would like to continue strategizing ways to improve student communication and student performance within my course. I think I could do that by continuing to work on standard-based live lessons that will help students specifically in my course to overcome hurdles they may incur. I'd also like to explore ways to create cross-curricular live lessons to help students understand the connections between subject areas.
Choosing a deliberate practice to work on was easy because one specifically dealt with rubrics, so I really wanted the students to be able to understand what a rubric was, why it was important in their lessons, and then to continue going forward and use them before they submitted the assignments. One of my big ahas this year was that my English students were not using the rubrics that were provided with every assignment. They would submit their work, oftentimes missing several needed elements. I would send the assignment back to them, they would redo it, and then I would regrade it. It became tedious and didn't help any of us in the long run. I knew going into this year that I needed another way to get them to read and utilize the rubric prior to submitting the assignment for the first time. Working in a group where every member taught a different subject could be challenging. Fortunately, during our time together, we were able to focus on our teaching craft and not necessarily on what we were teaching. We used our time together to share what was and wasn't working, brainstormed ways to improve our strategies, and developed new ways of working that worked best for us. Specifically, my PLC group listened to and provided input on my ideas and worked with me to develop a live lesson that challenged my students. My live lessons this year specifically addressed the needs of my students. I focused on lessons that they struggled with in the past and lessons that would help them succeed in the future assignments. During my end of the year survey last year, I found that lessons that I thought were easy, my students really struggled with. This gave me the opportunity to proceed those lessons with more instruction and guidance this year, hoping to make it a better experience for them. For the lesson that related to my DP, we discussed the importance of a rubric, how to successfully use them, and why they matter. The students were given a sample assignment as well as its grading rubric and were asked to grade the student. At first glance, the 3-page document looked great, and if I was grading holistically, it probably would have received a B. But what I wanted the students to discover was that the assignment was missing multiple elements that showed their mastery of the standard taught. I feel that this activity had a big impact on the way they viewed their future assignments. Through my efforts this year, I have noticed a significant improvement in the number of resubmissions I have received. I can tell that students have listened and are submitting their work after reviewing the rubric. Through my efforts this year, I have noticed a significant improvement in the number of resubmissions I have received. I can tell that students have listened and are submitting their work after reviewing the rubric. Going forward next year, I plan to discuss the grading rubrics with my students during the welcome call and offer live lesson opportunities earlier in the school year.
Now that we've all successfully completed our investigations into strategies for making our lives better, as well as increasing the amount of return on student work, we're going to continue to work together to find cross-curricular approaches for similar student issues in the future. And of course, we're going to have some fun along the way. On behalf of all of the members of the English, Language Arts, and World Languages Joint PLC, we would like to thank you for joining us for our presentation today. Now, we know these might not have been the best 20 minutes that you'll spend today, but we certainly hope they aren't the worst.
Thanks for watching my dad's video.